The town of Willow Creek prided itself on knowing everyone's business, but when it came to Daniel and Emily Parker, there wasn't much gossip to spread. Their life looked like something out of a Hallmark card. 10 years of marriage, a modest home with white shutters, a golden retriever sprawled lazily on the porch, and Sunday dinners that neighbors envied. To outsiders, their bond seemed unbreakable. Daniel was steady, the kind of man who fixed broken fences without being asked and waved at strangers with a warm grin. Emily, with her auburn hair tied neatly in a bun most days, carried herself with the composure of a woman who had everything she ever wanted. But perfection, as it always does, had cracks too fine for the naked eye. Emily often caught herself staring at her husband when he wasn't looking, searching for something she couldn't quite name. At night, she'd wake to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, shoulders tense, eyes distant as though he were carrying a weight he couldn't share. When she asked, he'd smile faintly, kiss her forehead, and murmur, "Just thinking about work, Em. Go back to sleep." She wanted to believe him, and most of the time, she did. The days in Willow Creek stretched long and predictable. Daniel ran his contracting business, hammering beams beneath the Texas sun, while Emily taught art classes at the local community center. Their evenings were filled with the small rituals of married life. Emily stirring chili on the stove while Daniel whistled and chopped onions, their laughter echoing off kitchen tiles. Still, sometimes when she leaned into him, she felt an invisible barrier, as though his embrace wasn't complete. 10 years, Emily said one warm August evening as they sat on the porch swing, cicadas buzzing in the distance. "Feels like we just set our vows yesterday." Daniel's smile softened. "And I'd marry you all over again tomorrow." She laughed, touched by his certainty, yet a hollow space gnawed quietly inside her. It wasn't that he didn't love her. She felt that love in countless gestures. But there was something locked away in him, something she could never quite touch. The townsfolk adored them. At church gatherings, people would comment, "That Daniel, he's the kind of man every woman dreams about. And Emily? She's lucky, bless her heart." Emily would smile politely, clutching Daniel's hand while a flicker of unease pulsed in her chest. No one ever noticed, not even Daniel. On the surface, they were untouchable. But deep down, Emily sensed what she couldn't yet name, a truth hidden like a landmine beneath her marriage, waiting for the wrong step. She brushed the thought away most days, convincing herself that every couple had their secrets, their silences, their shadows. Yet the shadows in Daniel's eyes grew darker with time. That night, as Daniel slipped into bed beside her, his arms circling her waist, Emily closed her eyes, willing herself to believe in their perfect marriage. But her heart, traitorous and restless, whispered a warning she didn't want to hear. By morning, the warning Emily felt the night before had faded like a half-remembered dream. She moved through her day as always, lesson plans stacked on her desk at the community center, Daniel sending her playful texts about dinner, and neighbors waving as she carried groceries to the porch. Yet beneath the routine, something throbbed in her chest. A sense of distance, an itch she couldn't scratch. She told herself it was just fatigue, that she was being ungrateful for questioning a husband who worked so hard to provide for them. But the whisper persisted. The first sign came on a Tuesday evening. Daniel returned home late, his shirt damp with sweat, his face pale. He dropped his tool bag by the door, muttering that work had run long. When Emily leaned in for a kiss, he turned his head slightly. Too slightly for it to be accidental. Her smile faltered. "You okay?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then forced a grin. "Just tired, long day." His answer was simple, but his voice wavered as though it carried something more. Over the following weeks, Emily began noticing patterns. Daniel avoided intimacy, slipping into the shower before she stirred, climbing into bed after she was asleep. He dodged annual checkups, making excuses about hating doctors. And then there was the drawer in the garage, a small, steel-locked box tucked beneath his old hunting gear. She asked about it once while they were cleaning. "What's in there?" "Just receipts," Daniel replied too quickly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Stuff for taxes. Nothing you'd want to mess with." Emily nodded, but unease curled in her gut. Receipts didn't need a lock. One night, Emily woke to the faint buzz of Daniel's phone vibrating on the nightstand. The screen glowed with an unsaved number. She reached instinctively, but he snatched it before she could read. "It's work," he muttered, slipping out of bed. At 2:17 a.m., Emily sat upright, pulse racing, listening to the muffled cadence of his voice in the hallway. He spoke softly, urgently, but she couldn't make out the words. She pressed her ear against the doorframe. And then she heard it. A low, unfamiliar name breathed into the phone, followed by silence. The next morning, Emily couldn't shake the sound. "Who called you last night?" she asked over breakfast, her spoon clinking against the bowl. Daniel froze mid-sip of coffee. "I told you, a client." "In the middle of the night?" His eyes hardened for a flicker of a second before he softened his tone. "Some people work odd hours, Em. Don't worry." But she did worry, because behind his words was something cold, something rehearsed. That evening, she lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling while Daniel's steady breathing filled the room. Her mind spun with questions she didn't want to ask. Why the secrecy? Why the late-night whispers? And why did her husband, after 10 years of marriage, feel like a stranger lying next to her? She told herself she was imagining things, that paranoia was eating her alive. Yet as the clock ticked toward midnight, she knew one truth. Something inside her marriage had shifted, and the whisper in the dark was only the beginning. The whisper had grown into a hum Emily could no longer ignore. Every time she walked into the garage, her eyes landed on the locked drawer tucked beneath Daniel's hunting gear. It sat there innocently enough, but in her mind it pulsed like a living thing, guarding answers to questions she hadn't dared to ask. Days passed in a blur of strained smiles and half-conversations. Daniel kissed her goodbye each morning, but she noticed the way his gaze lingered on her a fraction too long, as though he feared she might discover something. The more he smiled, the more she distrusted it. One Saturday, when Daniel left early to run errands, Emily stood alone in the garage, the scent of sawdust and motor oil thick in the air. Her heart hammered as she knelt in front of the steel drawer. She tugged at the handle. Locked, of course. But Daniel underestimated her persistence. Emily rummaged through the house until she found a small set of keys tucked inside his desk drawer. Most didn't fit. But one slid in smoothly. The lock clicked, sharp and final, and her hands trembled as she pulled the drawer open. Inside lay a stack of old envelopes, yellowed with time. Beneath them, folded documents bore names and dates she didn't recognize. Her fingers moved mechanically, lifting papers she didn't yet want to understand. At the top of the pile was an old driver's license. The photo stared back at her. Younger, softer, unmistakably Daniel. But the name beneath it read, Danielle Harper. Her breath caught in her throat. "No." The words slipped out before she realized she'd spoken. She flipped through the rest with growing dread. Hospital discharge papers stamped from a clinic in Houston. Medical forms listing procedures she couldn't bring herself to read in full. And then the letters. Handwritten, intimate, signed with a name she didn't know. When Daniel returned home, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, the documents spread before her like shattered glass. He froze in the doorway. "Emily, what are you doing?" Her eyes burned. "Who is Danielle? And why the hell was she married to me for 10 years without telling me?" Daniel's face drained of color. For a moment, he looked like a boy caught in the headlights. "I was going to tell you. I wanted to—" "You wanted to?" Her voice cracked. 10 years, Daniel. 10 years? And I find out from a drawer you thought you could keep locked?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, recoiling as though his touch might burn her. "It's still me," he whispered desperately. "I'm still the man you fell in love with." Emily shook her head, choking on a bitter laugh. "No. You're a stranger. I don't even know who I've been sharing my bed with." The room fell silent, broken only by the tick of the wall clock. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his expression a mix of shame and fear. Later that night, when Emily lay awake staring to the ceiling, the papers sat heavy on the dresser. No matter how much she tried, she couldn't erase the image of the name, Danielle Harper. It was more than betrayal. It was as though her entire marriage had been rewritten without her consent. Every memory, every vow, every whispered "I love you," felt tainted by a lie too enormous to forgive. Her chest tightened as she turned toward the shadowy figure beside her. Daniel's breathing was steady, almost peaceful, but Emily's heart thundered with a single, merciless thought. This wasn't the man she married, and she could never see him the same again. The discovery poisoned everything. The papers from the drawer were burned into Emily's mind, staining every memory of the man she thought she knew. Each smile, each kiss, each promise replayed in her head with a cruel twist. Was it all an act? She couldn't look at Daniel the same way anymore. His laugh, once warm and reassuring, now sounded hollow. His touch, once a comfort, made her skin prickle with unease. She went about her routines with mechanical precision, but inside, the foundation of their marriage was crumbling. At breakfast the next morning, Daniel slid a plate of eggs across the table. "Em, you haven't eaten since yesterday," he said softly. Her fork clattered against the plate. "Don't you dare act like you care. Not when you've lied to me for 10 years. His jaw tightened. "I didn't lie. You hid who you were," she snapped, rising from her chair. "Do you have any idea what that does to me? To wake up and realize I've been married to a stranger?" Daniel looked stricken, but Emily couldn't stop. The fury had been bottled too long. "You had a choice," she continued, her voice trembling. "You could have trusted me, but you didn't. You decided for me, and now I can't even tell what was real between us." He opened his mouth, then closed it, eyes dropping to the table. Silence pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. The days blurred together. Emily moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding Daniel whenever possible. When he reached for her, she recoiled. When he tried to talk, she shut him down with cold stares. She replayed their wedding in her head. The vows, the ring sliding onto her finger, his promises of forever. Did Danielle stand there instead of Daniel? The thought twisted in her stomach, turning love into something grotesque. At night, she sat on the porch swing alone, listening to cicadas sing while the Texas heat clung to her skin. Her mind raced with images of her husband's other life, a name, a face, a body she never knew. How many lies had she swallowed without noticing? How many truths had he buried beneath their love? One evening, Daniel stepped onto the porch, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Emily," he said quietly, "please, I need you to see me. Not the papers, not the past, me." She stared ahead, refusing to meet his eyes. "I don't know who you are anymore." He sat beside her, the swing creaking under his weight. "I'm still the man who built this house with you. The man who kissed you goodnight 1,000 times. That hasn't changed." Her voice cracked. "But it has. Everything's changed. I don't know if I can love you through this." Daniel reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, the gesture slicing deeper than words ever could. "Ciao." Inside, Emily stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. The woman staring back looked older, harder, hollowed by betrayal. She touched her chest, wondering if her heart could survive the fracture. Love had once bound her to Daniel, but now that bond was fraying, unraveling thread by thread, and in its place, resentment grew. Sharp, unrelenting, impossible to contain. The silence between them had stretched thin, brittle as glass. Emily could no longer bear the weight of questions circling her mind like vultures. She had spent days pretending, moving around Daniel as though he were a shadow haunting the home they had built together. But the tension had reached its limit. She needed the truth, and she needed it spoken aloud. On a humid Thursday evening, she cornered him in the kitchen. The air smelled of rain and something metallic, like a storm waiting to break. "Enough," she said, her voice trembling but sharp. "No more half-truths. No more pretending. I want everything, Daniel. I want the truth about who you really are." He froze by the sink, his hand gripping the faucet as if it were the only thing holding him upright. For a moment he didn't speak, his back turned to her. Then, slowly, he exhaled and faced her. "I was born Danielle Harper," he said quietly. "Before I met you. Before I built this life. I transitioned years ago, long before you came into the picture. When I met you, I wanted to tell you, but you didn't." Emily's words cut through the air. He flinched, then continued. "I didn't because I was terrified. You were everything I ever wanted, and I thought if you knew, you'd leave me before I had the chance to show you how much I loved you." Emily's throat tightened. "So you stole my choice. You let me believe in something that was never real." "It was real," Daniel insisted, stepping closer, his eyes burning with desperation. "Every moment, every kiss, every night we held each other. It was all real. My past doesn't erase what we had." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But it wasn't the truth, and love built on lies doesn't survive." He reached for her, but she backed away until her shoulders pressed against the wall. "I kept it from you because I loved you," he said, his voice breaking. "Because I was afraid. Do you know how many people never give someone like me a chance? You saw me as a man, as whole. I couldn't risk losing that." Emily covered her face with her hands, her body trembling. "You don't get to make that decision for me. You don't get to decide what I can or can't accept. That's not love, Daniel. That's control." The rain outside began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Inside, the kitchen felt claustrophobic, their pain filling every corner. Daniel sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I thought I could carry it forever," he whispered. "I thought if I just loved you enough it wouldn't matter. But I was wrong. And I'm sorry, Emily. God, I'm so sorry." Emily stood rigid, staring at the man she had once adored. The words should have softened her, should have pierced through her anger, but instead they only deepened the wound. Because love wasn't enough anymore. Not after the years of silence. Not after the lies. That night, she lay awake listening to the storm rage outside. Daniel's confession replayed in her mind, each word carving deeper into her chest. He had given her the truth, finally. But it wasn't a gift. It was a blade. And with it, he had severed what Emily had hoped that hearing the truth would bring clarity. But instead, Daniel's confession left her drowning in contradictions. She paced through the house like a ghost, unable to escape the echo of his words. I was born Danielle. I loved you too much to tell you. What was meant as honesty had instead torn away her last defenses. Grief curdled into rage, and love twisted into something sharp enough to wound her from within. Days bled into nights with little distinction. Emily stopped eating properly, stopped returning calls from her friends, stopped going to the community center. She spent hours staring at the papers she'd pulled from the drawer, tracing the name Danielle Harper with trembling fingers. Each time she saw it, her chest tightened. It was proof of betrayal, a monument to the lie she'd been living. She told herself she was the victim, that she had given her heart unconditionally only to have it deceived. Daniel noticed the change in her. You're shutting me out, he said one evening as she sat rigid on the couch, eyes fixed on the muted television. She didn't look at him. I don't have anything left to say. Yes, you do. He knelt in front of her, his eyes pleading. Emily, please. We can work through this. You just have to let me in. Her laugh was hollow. Let you in? After 10 years of lies? After finding out I've been married to someone I never really knew? His shoulders slumped, and his voice cracked. I'm still me. No, she whispered coldly. You're not. At night, her mind became a battlefield. She replayed arguments in her head, twisting his words until they cut deeper. She imagined neighbors whispering behind her back if they ever learned the truth. She felt humiliated, used, deceived. And the more she spiraled, the less she saw Daniel as her husband, and the more she saw him as her enemy. Sleep abandoned her. Meals turned to ash in her mouth. Her body grew weaker, but her thoughts burned hotter, feeding off resentment and shame. One night, Daniel found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Talk to me, he begged. Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to us. Her eyes snapped to his, wild and glassy. There is no us. You killed that the moment you kept your secret. Emily, stop. Her voice rose, shaking. Every time I look at you, I see the lie. I see the man who tricked me into building a life on sand, and I can't live with it. Daniel's lips parted as though to respond, but the words never came. He stood frozen, watching as the woman he loved unraveled before him. That night, when he finally fell asleep, Emily remained awake, clutching the sheets in her fists. Her mind screamed with betrayal, the sound so loud she thought it might split her skull. He doesn't deserve me. He never did. I gave everything, and he gave me nothing but a lie. It was the first time she admitted to herself that love was gone. What remained was only rage, raw, blistering, and uncontrollable. Our fragile bond still tied them together. Emily's rage had no outlet, no safe place to land. It consumed her quietly, gnawing at her ribs, feeding on every thought that passed through her mind. But rage is never content to remain hidden. It seeks evidence, justification, proof that betrayal runs deeper than the surface. She found it on a Sunday after. Noon. Daniel had left for a hardware run, and Emily wandered the house like a restless spirit. In the study, she noticed a shoebox wedged behind a row of books. Her hands shook as she pulled it free, the cardboard soft with age. Inside were letters, dozens of them bound together with twine. The handwriting was elegant, looping, undeniably feminine. Emily unfolded the first. My dearest Danielle, I don't know how to let you go. The world isn't kind to people like us. But when I'm with you, I feel seen. I feel alive. Her stomach lurched. She tore open another. I still remember the way you touched my hand at the lake. The way you promised me we'd build a future. Why did you disappear? Why did you choose another life without me? The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just about Daniel's past. This was about another love. A forbidden one, hidden and silenced. When Daniel returned, she confronted him before he could set down his bags. What are these? She shoved the letters into his chest. His face went pale. Emily, don't you dare say my name like that. Who is she? Who were you writing to? How many lies have I been living in? Daniel's hands trembled as he held the letters. That was before you, before everything. I ended it because I wanted a life that could last, with you. Emily's voice cracked with fury. So I was your second choice? Your clean slate? What am I supposed to do with that? He stepped closer, desperate. It's not what you think. I loved her, yes, but it was complicated. It wasn't safe. I wanted something stable. You gave me that. You gave me more than I thought I deserved. Her chest burned as she pushed him back. Don't twist this into gratitude. Don't stand there and tell me I was some prize you settled for. That night, Emily read every letter alone, her tears smearing the ink. Each one was a dagger, cutting deeper than the last. She pictured Daniel with another woman, whispering promises, sharing secrets, building intimacy that she thought belonged to her alone. Her humiliation swelled into obsession. She imagined neighbors laughing behind her back, whispering about the wife who never really knew her husband. She imagined the forbidden lover out there somewhere, carrying pieces of Daniel she would never reclaim. The mirror in the bedroom became her enemy. She stared at her reflection, at the hollow eyes and clenched jaw, and whispered, I was never enough. Not for him. Not for anyone. When Daniel tried to reach for her that night, she recoiled. Emily, please, stop torturing yourself. Those letters don't mean anything anymore. She turned on him, her voice sharp as glass. They mean everything. They mean you've been lying long before me, that I've been a replacement for a life you couldn't have. Do you understand what that does to me? He looked at her with helpless sorrow, but it only enraged her further. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of secrets. Every drawer, every box, every shadow whispered of the past he had hidden, and Emily, consumed by betrayal, felt her sanity fraying with each passing day. The letters had stripped away the last threads of restraint. Emily no longer saw Daniel as her partner, but as a stranger who had stolen a decade of her life. She carried the weight of betrayal everywhere, in her chest, in her clenched jaw, in the restless nights when she lay awake listening to his steady breathing. And then, one restless afternoon, she opened the attic. Dust swirled around her as she pulled back a heavy trunk. Inside, beneath old quilts and photo albums, lay Daniel's hunting rifle. She lifted it with both hands, surprised by its weight, by the way the cold steel seemed to anchor her shaking body. She told herself she wasn't going to use it, not yet. She only wanted to feel control, to hold something powerful in a world where she felt powerless. Daniel noticed the change in her. "You're distant again," he said one evening over dinner, his fork untouched. "Please, Emily, don't let the past ruin us." She set her knife down slowly, her voice flat. "It already has." His eyes searched hers. "We can still fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." Emily forced a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you built our marriage on lies." The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than any argument. Days passed, each one quieter than the last. The house grew tense with unspoken words. Daniel tried to bridge the gap, offering coffee in the mornings, brushing her arm in passing. But Emily recoiled from every gesture. At night, the rifle haunted her. She had hidden it behind the bedroom closet, where Daniel never looked. Sometimes she sat on the edge of the bed, the gun across her lap, running her fingers over the barrel. The weight of it filled her with a dark calm. One stormy evening, Daniel found her sitting alone in the living room. "You don't have to punish me forever," he said gently. "I know I hurt you, but I'm still here. I'm still fighting for us." Emily's eyes flicked to him, cold and distant. "And I'm the fool who believed in us. Do you know what it feels like to wake up every day knowing the life you built was never real?" He swallowed hard. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to be loved." Her voice dropped, sharp as a blade. "And you wanted it at any cost, even if it destroyed me." The thunder outside rattled the windows, but the louder noise was the silence that followed their words. It filled the room, thick and unbearable, pressing down until neither of them could breathe. Daniel retreated to the bedroom, shoulders heavy with defeat. Emily stayed behind, her gaze fixed on the darkened window. In the reflection, she saw herself, hollow-eyed, rigid, holding a secret only she knew. That the rifle was waiting. That silence could only hold so long before it exploded. That night, as Daniel drifted into uneasy sleep, Emily opened the closet and brushed her fingers across the steel once more. The storm roared outside, but the real storm was inside her chest, pounding, demanding release. The storm had carried into morning, leaving the sky a dull gray, the air thick with unease. Emily moved through the house in silence, her motions mechanical, her mind numb. She had stopped crying days ago. Tears no longer served her. What filled her now was something colder, sharper, a resolve she couldn't explain, even to herself. Daniel was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug, the sound of water trickling against porcelain. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "Coffee?" he asked softly, almost pleading. Emily's hands twitched at her sides. "No." The word hung between them like a final verdict. Later, when he retreated to the bedroom to change, she followed. The rifle was already in her hands, its weight familiar now, almost natural. Her breath came shallow as she stepped into the doorway. "Emily?" Daniel's voice caught when he saw her. "What are you doing with that?" Her silence answered for her. He raised his hand slowly, fear flickering in his eyes. "Please. You don't want to do this." Her voice shook, but her grip didn't. 10 years, Daniel. 10 years of lies. You let me build my life on sand, and you just stood there, watching me drown. "I was trying to protect us," he whispered. "To protect you. I never wanted to hurt you. You already did." The room crackled with tension, each second stretching into eternity. Emily's finger hovered, trembling, on the trigger. Daniel's eyes searched hers, desperate, pleading. "Emily, I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, don't let this be how our story ends." A sob tore through her chest, raw and violent. "Our story ended the day I found the truth." The thunder outside rolled low, like a warning drumbeat, her vision blurred with rage and despair, and then, almost without realizing, she pulled. The rifle erupted. The sound was deafening, shaking the walls, silencing the storm itself. Daniel's body jerked backward, his expression frozen in shock, before collapsing onto the carpet. The spreading stain beneath him bloomed deep and red, stark against the beige floor. For a moment there was nothing but ringing silence. Emily stood rooted, the rifle slipping from her hands, clattering against the floor. She stared at Daniel's still form, waiting for him to move, to speak, to prove that what she'd done wasn't irreversible. But he didn't. Her chest heaved, her hands shook violently. The house, once filled with echoes of laughter, arguments, the rhythm of a life, now held only one sound, the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Tick, tick, tick. Emily pressed her hands to her ears, but the silence only grew louder, pressing in until she thought she'd suffocate. The rifle lay on the floor, its barrel pointing nowhere, while Daniel's body sprawled across the carpet, blood spreading wider and wider. Emily stood frozen, her pulse drumming in her ears. The air reeked of gunpowder and iron. She stumbled backward, colliding with the wall. Her legs trembled, barely holding her upright. She wanted to scream, but her throat closed like a vice. Through the window, the storm had cleared. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds, falling cruelly across the body of her husband. It made the scene almost surreal, like a photograph captured in stark detail. The sound of the gunshot had not gone unnoticed. Minutes later, the first knock rattled the front door. Mrs. Caldwell, their elderly neighbor, called out, "Emily, are you all right? What was that noise?" Emily's breath hitched. Her voice came out brittle. "Everything's fine." But the tremor betrayed her, and the knocking grew harder, sharper. Then came another voice, Mr. Harris from across the street. "We heard something. Should we call the police?" Panic surged through Emily's chest. She pressed her back against the wall, sliding down to the floor, eyes darting to Daniel's lifeless form. "No," she whispered to herself. "Not yet. Please, not yet." The knocking turned to pounding. Mrs. Caldwell's voice cracked with alarm. "Emily, open this door." Unable to move, Emily covered her ears. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the relentless chorus of neighbors, suspicion, and fear pressing in from every direction. Finally, she forced herself to rise. She opened the door just a crack, enough to reveal her pale face. "I dropped something heavy," she lied, her voice unsteady. "I'm fine. Please just leave me be." The neighbors exchanged glances, unconvinced. The smell of gunpowder drifted faintly from the house, and Mrs. Caldwell's sharp eyes narrowed. "Emily," she whispered, "what happened in there?" Emily's gaze faltered. "Nothing. Please." They withdrew reluctantly, but the tension remained. Curtains across the street shifted as more neighbors peered out. Whispering, pointing. The quiet suburban street buzzed with suspicion, and Emily felt their eyes like daggers through her skin. Emily knelt beside Daniel's body, her hands hovering over him, not daring to touch. "What did I do?" she whispered. "God, What did I do? Her tears finally came, falling hot and fast, mixing with the dark pool beneath him. The rifle lay on the floor, its barrel pointing nowhere, while Daniel's body sprawled across the carpet, blood spreading wider and wider. Emily stood frozen, her pulse drumming in her ears. The air reeked of gunpowder and iron. She stumbled backward, colliding with the wall. Her legs trembled, barely holding her upright. She wanted to scream, but her throat closed like a vice. Through the window, the storm had cleared. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds, falling cruelly across the body of her husband. It made the scene almost surreal, like a photograph captured in stark detail. The sound of the gunshot had not gone unnoticed. Minutes later, the first knock rattled the front door. Mrs. Caldwell, their elderly neighbor, called out, "Emily, are you all right? What was that noise?" Emily's breath hitched. Her voice came out brittle. "Everything's fine." But the tremor betrayed her, and the knocking grew harder, sharper. Then came another voice, Mr. Harris from across the street. "We heard something. Should we call the police?" Panic surged through Emily's chest. She pressed her back against the wall, sliding down to the floor, eyes darting to Daniel's lifeless form. "No," she whispered to herself. "Not yet. Please, not yet." The knocking turned to pounding. Mrs. Caldwell's voice cracked with alarm. "Emily, open this door." Unable to move, Emily covered her ears. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the relentless chorus of neighbors, suspicion, and fear, pressing in from every direction. Chum. Finally, she forced herself to rise. She opened the door just a crack, enough to reveal her pale face. "I dropped something heavy," she lied, her voice unsteady. "I'm fine. Please, just leave me be." The neighbors exchanged glances, unconvinced. The smell of gunpowder drifted faintly from the house, and Mrs. Caldwell's sharp eyes narrowed. "Emily," she whispered, "what happened in there?" Emily's gaze faltered. "Nothing, please." They withdrew reluctantly, but the tension remained. Curtains across the street shifted as more neighbors peered out, whispering, pointing. The quiet suburban street buzzed with suspicion, and Emily felt their eyes like daggers through her skin. Inside, the house seemed to close in around her. Blood soaked deeper into the carpet. The ticking clock in the bedroom felt louder, each second dragging her closer to exposure. Emily knelt beside Daniel's body, her hands hovering over him, not daring to touch. "What did I do?" she whispered. "God, what did I do?" Her tears finally came, falling hot and fast, mixing with the dark pool beneath him. The neighbors' whispers grew into police sirens. Within the hour, red and blue lights painted the street, flashing across the white siding of suburban houses. Emily stood in her living room, numb, hands cuffed behind her back while officers moved around her home, photographing, cataloging, collecting. Daniel's body was carried out on a stretcher, covered by a white sheet that concealed everything except the unbearable truth. The trial came swiftly. Small-town Texas courts thrived on spectacle, and this case had everything: betrayal, secrets, forbidden love, and a wife-turned-killer. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters, cameras clicking like locusts, neighbors whispering as though every word could burn her further. Emily sat at the defense table, her once polished image reduced to hollow eyes and trembling hands. She barely recognized herself in the reflection of the glass pane between her and the gallery. The prosecutor painted her as cold, calculating. She discovered her husband's past, and instead of walking away, she chose violence, his voice thundered. This wasn't an accident. This was vengeance, premeditation, murder. Every word was a hammer pounding her deeper into the ground. Her lawyer, weary but determined, offered a different picture. Emily Carter was a woman broken by deception, he argued. 10 years of lies unraveled in a single moment. She snapped, not out of cruelty, but out of betrayal so deep it dismantled her very sense of reality. This is not the portrait of a murderer, but of a victim pushed past her breaking point. Emily listened, her heart pounding, wishing she could crawl inside the words and hide. Witnesses paraded through the courtroom. Mrs. Caldwell testified about the gunshot, her voice trembling as she described Emily's pale face at the door. Mr. Harris spoke of strange tension between the couple in recent months. The letters Emily had discovered were read aloud, each word echoing in the chamber like a ghost summoned back to life. When Daniel's past, his transition, his hidden love affair, was brought into the open, the courtroom gasped. Emily bowed her head, shame and grief colliding in her chest. This was no longer just about what she had done. It was about who Daniel had been and what secrets their marriage had buried. At last, Emily took the stand. Her voice shook, but her words carried raw honesty. "I loved him," she whispered. "Even after the lies, I loved him. But every day I woke up feeling like I was drowning in someone else's life. I couldn't breathe. And when I held that rifle, it felt like the only way to stop the pain. I didn't plan it, I didn't want it. But I pulled the trigger, and now I have to live with that forever." The courtroom fell into heavy silence, her confession hanging in the air like smoke. The judge's gavel struck, calling the session to close. Emily was led away, wrists bound once more, the weight of justice pressing down like chains she could never escape. The gavel's echo faded, but Emily's world did not return to silence. The trial ended, yet the story lived on, replayed endlessly in newspapers, on television, whispered in grocery store aisles. The Texas wife who killed her husband. The title clung to her like a second skin. In her cell, nights stretched endlessly. The hum of fluorescent lights replaced the ticking clock at home. The mattress was thin, the blanket rough, but the real prison was memory. She saw Daniel everywhere, in the tilt of a stranger's smile, in the way shadows pooled on the concrete floor. His voice lingered in her mind, fractured between pleas of love and the deafening silence after the shot. Visitors dwindled, friends turned their backs. Even family spoke her name in hushed tones, embarrassed to claim her. The world outside moved on, but Emily remained frozen in the moment of betrayal and the trigger's pull. Her lawyer came once, papers in hand, speaking of appeals. "We might argue diminished capacity, emotional trauma," he said, his voice clipped and professional. Emily shook her head. "No more lies. Let them judge me for what I did, not what I almost was." At night, she whispered into the dark, speaking to Daniel as though he sat across from her. "I would have forgiven you," she confessed, "if you'd told me the truth, if you'd trusted me. But now I'm the monster, and you're the one they'll mourn." Her words dissolved into sobs, muffled against her hands. Outside the prison walls, Daniel's story was retold with sharp edges. Some painted him as a deceiver who deserved his fate. Others saw him as a victim twice over. Once for the life he was forced to hide, and again for the wife who couldn't bear the truth. The town itself became divided, neighbors taking sides in hushed conversations that never reached Emily's ears. To them, she was a headline, a cautionary tale, a tragic figure tangled in love and lies. In the end, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, heavy, echoing forever with the sound of a single gunshot.